Cool. So first, let's take a look at the electroacoustic euphonium repertoire as a whole. So to date, there have been over, well, at least 157 pieces for euphonium with electronics. Half of those have been composed within the last decade, so you can really see how modern music technology has kind of spurred this genre. The overwhelming majority of these pieces, roughly 3/4, are like Sonatina for euphonium with fixed media accompaniment. This is an accompaniment that's been pre-recorded for playback. The remainder are for euphonium with live electronics, some sort of electronics provided by hardware solutions like guitar effects pedals, or software solutions like Max, Pure Data, RTC Mix, things like that. So if you haven't heard it in a bit, or you've never heard it, here's just the intro of Sonatina. So that should be enough to give you kind of an idea of the feel of the piece. It may sound slightly dated to modern audiences, but I have had a freshman tuba player tell me, oh, it sounds like old school Zelda music. So I'm like, great, love it, I'll take it. So the entire electroacoustic euphonium genre began with this piece. It was composed in 1970 by John Boda, as I said, at FSU, and he used a Moog synthesizer purchased by FSU in 1969 to compose it. It cost $14,000, the equivalent of $120,000 today. It was 3 banks of, so yes, not this synthesizer, but this one. 3 banks of modules, 2 keyboards, and a 1/4 inch reel-to-reel recorder. And every time he wanted to perform with this, all of his equipment had to be moved from the studio to the stage, which is why eventually he recorded the electronic accompaniment for Sonatina to tape, so that way you can just sit down and press play. It was composed at the urging of FSU low brass professor William Kramer, who actually premiered the piece on trombone. This was not only the first piece for euphonium with electronics, but also appeared on the first Carnegie Hall euphonium recital given by Brian Bowman in 1976. So let's take a look at the form first before we get into anything else, because there's been, well, you'll see once we get into it. It's in 3 movements, played without pause. As originally conceived, the tape plays throughout the entire thing. The movements just meld one into another into another. There are 2 timed cadenzas, as you can see. Cadenza 1 divides movements, the first 2 movements, that's about 1:10. And then the second cadenza divides up right in the middle of movement 3, which is in sonata form. It divides the recapitulation from the rest of the movement. That one is also timed, but for the first 1:02, the tape drops out, so it's just silence. The euphonium plays by itself, but if you do it right, the tape will come in at the appropriate time, and then you're back with the rest of movement 3. Oh, this also is in the modern accompaniment. During the silence is where the split happens, because now it's offered as 2 separate MP3 files. So the first file goes all the way up to the end of the first minute of silence, and then the second track comes in where the tape originally came back in. This will be important a little bit later on. So, any fixed media piece provides several challenges, the most important of which is the fixed tempo. You have to stay with the tempo of the recording of the track. It can't follow you. So with this in mind, most fixed media pieces make their tempo changes obvious through the use of rhythmic material, use a click track, or they just stay the same tempo throughout. As the first of its kind, Sonatina completely lacks any of these considerations. It's literally a recording of someone sitting down at the Moog and playing live and having that recorded to tape. So it features all the small tempo fluctuations that you'd expect with human performance. The second challenge is the sparsely notated score. As you can see, you get 2 lines, sometimes 3. Top line is euphonium, bottom line, sometimes 2 lines, is a reduction of the synthesizer part. This is enough to allow you to key into the Moog part and kind of find the beat, provided you actually do your due diligence in sitting down and studying the score while listening to the accompaniment. This score study will also allow you to figure out the meaning behind these various bits of unexplained notation. Like this, the stylized S and diverging and converging glissandi marks represent the electronic flourish you heard that opens the piece, and that returns several times throughout, most often to kind of separate sections. These X marks here, above the downbeats, indicate a synth percussion instrument that allows you to actually find the beat in what's otherwise a really sparsely orchestrated section. Other bits of notation are more intuitive or just outright explained. This tone row down here indicates a series of shifting pitches and tone clusters that make up kind of a shimmering, vague accompaniment all throughout this section. And then here, sometimes Boda will just give you outright a cue to get you out of a cadenza. Which brings us back to that second cadenza that was where the tape drops out and you have a minute of silence. So this is how it works. These are the instructions Boda gives you. Once the tape drops out, you begin the cadenza, playing it freely, but at roughly 92 beats per minute. If you do it right, you'll get to this measure marked by the star, right about when the tape comes back in. Now you're playing with the tape again, but you're playing completely out of time with the rhythm of the tape, so it's a little odd. Then, once you get to this first loud sound, which is actually like a kind of a synth bell sound on the tape, you stop playing the cadenza on whatever note you're on, or you finish up on the next note. Then you just wait until the second loud sound that happens here at that coda marking comes in, and that's when you're right back in time with the tape again to finish out the third movement. And like I said, this is where the split happens in the current modern version that you can get from Cimarron. Track 1 goes all the way to the end of the silence, and then track 2 begins right here. Well, sorry, actually right here at the start section. So the final challenge presented by Sonatina is that the track itself has changed several times throughout its life. Originally conceived of as a live synthesizer accompaniment, it was then recorded to quarter-inch reel-to-reel tape. Then, when Boda chose to publish Sonatina, he gave David Worden wailing music. David Worden took the original quarter-inch reel-to-reel tape, and then made that available on cassette tape. Then when David Worden sold his wailing music to Cimarron, Cimarron took the original, again, quarter-inch reel-to-reel tape, transferred that to digital audio tape and remastered it, and then offered it on cassette tape and CD before going fully digital and now offering it as 2 MP3 tracks. So the 2 MP3 tracks provide a small challenge in that now you have to worry about 2 audio tracks instead of just 1. This is kind of a small matter, but one that requires a little bit of planning, because now you need somebody else to either manually hit play on the second track, or you can simply cue the 2 tracks up one after another in a playlist. The advantage of this is that now you can play the entire final cadenza, the first section of the final cadenza, at your leisure. You don't have to stick to the 92 beat per minute pacing so that you come back in when the tape would originally come back in. The larger problem with the current remaster is that it sounds substantially different from the original analog tape version. Specifically here, there's a lot of kind of additional EQ and reverb that makes a lot of the rhythmic figures less distinct, making it a little harder to follow. But here, the EQ is made so that this section, in which a pre-recorded euphonium melody, actually a combination of Earl Louder and David Worden. It was originally recorded by Boda with Earl Louder playing it on the tape. And then once David Worden got it to publish, he actually redubbed it because it wasn't quite loud enough to be able to hear. But the effect is supposed to be that you, as the live performer, are playing a duet with a recorded euphonium. But now in the modern version, the EQ is such that you can barely hear the pre-recorded euphonium. So here's the current version available. And then here's the original tape version. So you can see it's more present. It's still fairly quiet on the original tape, which is why if you perform this, I would recommend taking a page out of David Worden's book, and in this duet section, actually playing it with a mute. That'll make it so that you're more or less balanced with the recorded euphonium and actually kind of matches your timbre to the kind of tinny tape sound. So, if you're feeling ambitious and you want to perform this piece as originally conceived, many music libraries still have Sonatina available in cassette tape form from the 1980s, prior to its remaster. And it may be available through interlibrary loan. So you can get your copy of the cassette tape. Get this, a tape-to-digital converter. Most of these are plug and play, so you don't even need any sort of specialized software. Just a USB cable to go straight in. Use an audio editor like Audacity, which is nice because it's free. Select this as your audio input in Audacity. Hit record in Audacity. Hit play on the tape player. Wait about 10 minutes or so for the tape to reach the end of the track. Hit stop, and then all you have to do is go back and delete kind of the loud pop that occurred when you actually hit play and stop on the tape player. Save that, and you're good to go. And now you have the tape version, the original tape version, for yourself and stored in Medium for easy playback on modern devices. Which will bring us to kind of how you would want to set up for this if you're going to be performing a lot of electroacoustic euphonium music. So there's a few different ways you can set up for it, but ultimately it just comes down to a few different things. All you really need are a playback device and a speaker or a set of speakers loud enough for your audience, and then something you can connect to the two. If you want to expand that, you can get a floor monitor so that you can hear the track. The floor monitor will be on the floor or somewhere nearby, pointed back at you, so that you can clearly hear what you're supposed to be keeping time with. And then if you really want to go pro, you get a mixer, because that makes it a lot easier to do sound check and set all your audio levels from one spot instead of having to go from speaker to speaker to speaker, tweaking each one individually. But let's start with the simplest setup from your playback device straight into a speaker or two. So a lot of loudspeakers now have auxiliary. Have auxiliary inputs. If your speaker has this, you're good to go, because all you have to do is run an aux cord from your playback device, like a phone or laptop, straight into it, and then you're fine. If you want to add a floor monitor, that's easy to do. All you take is an XLR cable, take your loudspeaker's pass-through input. What this will do is take everything that's coming into the speaker and pass it on to another speaker, allowing you to daisy chain speakers in succession, and then put that in the input of your monitor. Then all you have to do is set your main at the volume level appropriate for your audience, and then set your monitor at whatever volume works for you so you can hear it over your own playing. Oh, sorry, I have to talk about this too. If your speaker doesn't have an auxiliary input, but does have two 1/4-inch input channels, you can use this, a stereo breakout cable, to just go into both channels at once. What this does is it takes the stereo output coming from your playback device and splits it into two separate left and right 1/4-inch audio jacks. If you don't have 2 channels, if you only got 1, you're still going to need to use a breakout cable, but you'll only use one of the 1/4" jacks. The other one you'll just leave dangling. You can't use a 1/4" adapter to go from an aux cord into one of these mono inputs, because the signal coming from your playback device through this auxiliary cable is in stereo. But this is a mono input. So when that signal gets to that mono input, it's going to get merged down into a mono signal, but done in such a way that you'll get what's called phase cancellation. And basically, large portions of the playback track will end up getting muted when the phase on one of the 2 wires in here gets flipped and then summed together with the other one. So if you only got 1 input, you're just going to have to deal with having either your left or right channel, not both. Or you can just go into Audacity and just merge the track down into mono and then play it that way. That works too. So setup-wise, this is the easiest one to get away with not using a monitor, because you've just got a speaker that's going to be center stage, and that's more or less where you're going to be anyway. So you can have the speaker somewhat behind you, loud enough for the audience, which should also be loud enough for you, and then you just perform, up in front of it, and you're good to go. And like I said, you can easily take this setup and expand it to include a monitor using the pass-through. Using that, you can also daisy chain as many speakers as you want in succession. Be aware, though, that no matter how many speakers you add, this is essentially a mono playback setup, because the same sound is going to be coming out of each one of these speakers. So if there's any sort of left or right, you're going to lose that, and it's just going to be the same sound. If you want a true stereo setup, you can do this with stereo breakout cable again, and just add one of these extension cables that's long enough to go to both your speakers. Now you've got a true stereo setup, and all you really need to do is make sure that the levels on both of your speakers are set to the same thing, so that your left channel isn't suddenly louder than your right. And this one is also easy to add a monitor to, using the same XLR pass-through that we did on the first setup. But now be aware that you can, since you can only do pass-through to the monitor on one or the other, whichever of these you choose, that's the side that's going to be coming out of your monitor. So just left or just right, which really for most fixed media tracks is fine. Sonatina in particular, because it doesn't make use of a lot of left and right panning. So all you really need to be able to do is hear it well enough to stay with the track. And then the full setup, using a mixer. Once again, a lot of mixers will have an auxiliary input. So again, just take your aux cord straight from your playback device into there. If it doesn't, use the same stereo breakout cable and just go into one of the mixer's stereo input channels. Then you can easily set the level of the input right here. You can set your own monitor volume separately, and then set the levels for both speakers at once using this. If your mixer has any sort of internal effects, you want to make sure you turn those off. You don't want to add any sort of extra reverb or delay to the accompaniment track. And then just use 1/4" cables, one to each of the mains, and then one out to your monitor, and you're good to go. And so that'll look like this. You can get away with performing in stereo setups without a monitor. It just gets a bit trickier, because you're going to have to be up in front of both of these. And depending on how big your stage is and how big your audience is, the speakers may be too far apart for you to actually clearly hear them, even when you're at the front of the stage. Which is why if you're going to do a stereo setup on a large stage, you're pretty much going to want to have some sort of monitor pointed back at you, either floor monitor or just something nearby in ear if you want to go really expensive. But something so that you can stay with the accompaniment track. Depending on your venue, you may not need to bring your own equipment, but a lot of venues have stereo equipment that makes it very hard for the performer to hear the accompaniment track, which is why, as much as possible, if you're going to get heavy into electroacoustic performance, I recommend having at least a speaker and then expanding from there. So finally, something to be aware of is that Boda actually composed or arranged a piano reduction of the synthesizer part in 1972. It is currently unpublished, but is held at Florida State University, and Simon is looking to actually publish it sometime this year. So keep an eye out for this. This is my own little kind of mock-up of what the piano part with euphonium kind of sounds like. So this is actually a little bit easier to follow than the synthesizer part, because now that you've got a live acoustic instrument, you also have the agonic accent of playing louder on the downbeat, whereas the mode was very much flat all the way through, so it made it very easy to misplace the beat. There are a few other differences from the piano reduction to the original synthesizer. So in movement 1, the tape duet, the duet with the original recorded euphonium, is mostly present in the piano's right hand, but there's large sections that are gone now. So instead of being actually a duet between the two instruments, it's more just kind of a little bit of counterpoint from the piano with what the euphonium is playing. Cadenza 1 goes from being timed to just being a standard cadenza. The piano waits until the euphonium is done. Movement 2 in the original version was marked at 72 beats per minute. And if you actually played it at that tempo, you'd end up with 52 seconds of no euphonium, just tape, kind of a weird tape recitative where you're just standing on stage while the tape is rolling. It feels a little awkward, which I think is why in the piano reduction, which actually ended up being Boda's favorite version of this piece, he marks the euphonium at 60 beats per minute, and now the piano recitative is at their pleasure. So while they could go longer, it's more likely the piano player is going to want to just kind of glide by that a little more quickly than taking a full minute of just some shifting piano chords. Movement 3 is largely the same, except for the cadenza. Instead of the time cadenza with silence and then the euphonium picking back up, but out of time with the tape for the final 32 seconds. Now, the piano will wait for the euphonium to reach that original section where the tape would have come back in, and then starts playing. But you are still, as a performer, out of time with the piano. You have a completely different tempo and different number of measures than the piano does. From there, the rest of it plays out much like the tape, where the piano will play a first loud chord. You stop your cadenza there on that note, or whatever the next note is, and then wait for the piano to play the second loud chord, and then after that, you're back in time with the piano to finish out movement 3. So you kind of lose the electroacoustic aspect of the piece by doing it with piano, but it does give you another option, one that's a lot less equipment intensive, and I think gives you another way to perform what is currently, I think, an underperformed euphonium piece that still has a lot of historical significance. So cool. If you scan this, you get taken to my website where most of these setups you saw are up already. I'll be adding the rest as time goes on. There's also repertoire lists of every current or every documented electroacoustic euphonium work I've found so far. But yeah, thank you so much. You can go like that. Are there any questions before we wrap up? All right, cool. Thank you so much for coming.